Minister Trivan, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us today at this special event on climate change, adapt, mitigate and change, where UNDP is pleased to co-host with the organisers of the Belgrade Security Forum. We've gathered a distinguished panel today with representatives from key institutions to discuss this issue of climate change. In the course of the next hour and a half, I hope that we're able, with the help of you, the audience, to really answer the question, how is the changing climate affecting security? In many countries around the world, the most vulnerable suffer a double burden of climate change and conflict. The Institute of Economics and Peace, in its Global Peace Index from this year, estimates that about 1 billion people are highly exposed to climate hazards, and of these, 400 million face the double burden of climate hazards plus low levels of peacefulness. While climate change does not directly cause violent conflicts in most instances, in and of itself, when institutions are weak and people are struggling to survive, it can exacerbate that vulnerability. At the global level, the UN Environment Programme and other institutions, other partners, are working with UNDP to explore these linkages between climate change, peace and security. We focus on things like climate security risk assessments, risk prevention and management strategies, and targeted evidence-based advocacy. At UNDP, we believe that climate change has a particularly big impact on human security and resilience of men and women in communities. Human security was a term that we used back in 1994 in our Human Development Report. And that said that security isn't just a military issue or an issue between states and nations. Human security actually relates to the vulnerabilities of people, individuals, women, men, children living in different societies. Essential components of that human security include things like health, education, shelter, environment, livelihoods, and so on. And these can be adversely affected by climate change. And in turn, if human insecurity rises, then that can potentially contribute to rising conflict and insecurity. We know that climate change impacts health, the environment, and economic security, with the poorest, women and men, most at risk and suffering most. As many of you saw, last month there was a very important event in New York, the Climate Summit, which was convened by the United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres, which really boosted the momentum to do something around climate change. And we saw that governments, the private sector and civil society were starting to do more than just make speeches and make words, but actually take action. One of the key results of the summit was that 65 countries and major subnational economies committed to cut greenhouse gas emissions to net zero by 2050. The private sector also made some very important commitments at the Climate Summit. There was a group of the largest asset owners responsible for directing more than $2 trillion in investments who committed to move to carbon neutral investments by 2050. Also, 130 banks, which constitute 1/3 of global banking sector, signed up and committed to aligning with the Paris agreements. So, as we move on to the panel now, I'd like us to reflect on two key issues or questions. Firstly, globally, in the last 4 years, it's been the hottest recorded 4 years on record around the world. Can we adapt to the more than 2 degrees centigrade increase compared with pre-industrial levels? And if not, what will the planet look like? Second question, how will climate change impact our lives? Food production, agriculture, population displacement and other issues, and more importantly, what can we do about it? So to find out the answers to these really important questions, I'd like to welcome and invite our panel to the stage. So Professor Vladimir Đorđević from the Faculty of Physics at the University of Belgrade, Dr. Nedžad Emiroğlu, the Director of Health, Emergencies and Communicable Diseases from WHO Regional Office for Europe, and Mr. Yanis Kopač, Director of the Energy Community Secretariat. And before we start with the panel discussion, we are very honoured to have as our keynote speaker Mr. Goran Trivan, the Minister of Environment. Ladies and gentlemen, please give a warm welcome to Minister Trivan.
Well, dear Francine, ladies and gentlemen, dear hosts, good day. First of all, let me tell you that I'm really honored to be here today, because it's pretty unusual that environmental protection has that approach that we have in Ministry of Environmental Protection, thinking that that issue of not environmental, but when we are talking about state security and all of securities, it is not possible to talk in our planet anymore about any security, but talking without environmental protection. But talking about natural resources, for instance. But talking about water, for instance. So let me, because of our time, not that usual for myself, but I have to read a couple of pages of our thoughts about this theme. So the first chapter is been named Small Countries and Leadership in World Climate Issues. So the most recent Argentine initiative by United Nations began 5 years ago by the adoption of the Paris Agreement. That was the beginning of a new global era, and it is almost certain that it will last well into the future. It is almost like a new war, but a war that did not start with the crossing of borders or by assassination of a leader or bombing campaign. It is something that concerns all of the humanity and climate change across the entire planet. It's a totally different war. War against ourselves, if you think well. The main motto of the new United Nations Summit is the catastrophic climate change, which is attributed to the increase in local and global temperatures. Whether the greenhouse effect is the initial factor for the domino effect of the creation of the last and previous hurricanes such as Dorian or wildfires in the Amazon rainforest, Australia, Indonesia, California, Siberia, Greece, etc., etc. Is a complex scientific topic deliberated by experts who put forward evidence of weight, the reliability of their views. Their views, as time to time, are different. The Paris Agreement obliges and encourages all participants in proportion to their resources and contribution to the emission of harmful gases into atmosphere to commit to a long-standing obligation of reduction and regeneration of their slice of atmosphere and territory by introducing renewable energy. The whole package, adopted by the last UN summit in September this year, reinforces the front line of all countries' commitment to embrace the concept of responsibility of human contribution to global warming through measures to improve the effectiveness of natural planetary protection. This essentially a security concept of the assembled countries has a synergetic effect of the issue, but there remains the question of trust in the leadership of the most influential countries concerning the strategic management of sustainable development of the planet. Basically, the security sector is moving from the superiority of weapons of the most complex scientific sector, first of foremost of energy, both nuclear and free electromagnetic, even the cosmic energy. Nikola Tesla, who spoke about it and studied it over the years, is followed by the most powerful forces in their research work. As much as the Paris Agreement has encroached on strategic issues, the ecological security component is vital for a small country like Serbia in terms of health of population, maintaining biodiversity, healthy food sources, and clean water resources. Serbia, with its activities, contributes very little to climate change, but is looking forward to the global synergy for reducing environmental risks due to pollutant gases and their impact on Serbia's own population and territory. Second chapter, national security and the overall strategic significance of ecology and climate changes as national or global challenge. Shortly, the limited availability of natural resources, including water, food, energy, and raw materials, as well as climate change and the degradation of natural environment, are threatening the stability of individual countries and entire regions and directly affect national security in that respect. Serbia is not and cannot be an exception to such impact. In general sense, national security as a state of protection of national and territorial values and interests of the states and the citizens from all forms, threats, is becoming a subject of environmental and climate risks and a matter of consideration under national security strategy and programs, as we know. The National Security Strategy of Republic of Serbia is the highest umbrella strategic document whose implementation protects the national values and interests of the Republic of Serbia against security challenges, risks and threats in all areas of social life, including environmental security, meaning threats of climate change and global warming. By including these issues in the National Security Strategy, Serbia has become one of the few progressive countries side by side with the most developed countries in the world that have addressed this issue in that way. And we are proud of this. The third chapter, climate change and climate energy for planet protection, the risks of abuse with special impact on small countries and regional territories. The position of the Paris Initiative and Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations, of course, is particularly threatened by the fact that renewable energy will significantly increase in share in global consumption in the future. Therefore, it is of particular national interest to actively monitor and take measures to protect against irreversible changes caused by climate, geophysical, and technological impact during the current and future national activities of global and regional sustainable development. This is especially true of the impact that climate change can have on social, economic, and demographic aspects, including catastrophic consequences of natural and environmental disasters. The fact the global entities impose environmental standards raises a particular national interest to assess the adequacy of their full or selective implementation in order to avoid restricting or hindering the economic development of our country and the national level while aligning in a global sustainable development trends. Regardless of whether the concept of future sustainable development depends solely on climate change, in the last 30 years, a new scientific, technological, and interdisciplinary field has emerged, monitoring and influencing the local global climate change known as climate engineering. It's a very important issue. Fourth, climate diplomacy and its role, not only in the world but also in our ministry, trying to tell you that we are trying to be very useful for our country, believing that as, for instance, United Kingdom adopt its own strategy more than 20 years ago of its issue, telling that Serbia is running very fast to have that angle, may I say, with the very modern and very advanced countries in the world. So diplomacy begins at home. As the saying goes, and the Ministry of Environmental Protection has started to deal seriously and actively with climate diplomacy and promote its importance. This is natural course of things that has happened in the past in many developed countries, such as Great Britain, France, Germany, etc. Recognizing the importance of climate change not only as a purely environmental issue, but also as a modern security challenge for our country, the Ministry of Environmental Protection has formed a special group of environmental security in 2017. In cooperation with other institutions that have also included the issue of environmental safety in their work, such as our security agency, police, the prosecution, the first step have been taken to systematically and continuously address this issue in our country. This was recognized directly and surely in the national security strategy, which indicates that our country understands the transformed nature of new security challenges, risks and threats in the country. In international relations, through its active and highly progressive approach, the Ministry has succeeded over the past 2 years in establishing itself as a relevant, proactive actor in regional and global environmental cooperation, leading to the election of Serbia as Vice President to the next Assembly of the United Nations Environmental Assembly to be held in Nairobi in 2021. In our international activities, we have pointed out and continue to do so that climate change, environmental and energy security issues have long been deeply entrenched in national security issues, and that a broad, systematic approach is needed in addressing these issues in the country. We have also pointed out that cooperation in these areas is not burdened with the issues from the past, which is the first and necessary condition for the development and cooperation between all of our countries in that region. This cooperation must be in good faith because, as far as national security is concerned, national borders are ecologically much more porous because ecological issues can occur on our side of the planet and have effects on the opposite side of it. Climate diplomacy can also successfully help in dealing with new challenges such as population migration, which are often the result not only of wars and conflicts, but also of the effect of climate change that are destroying certain already poor areas. And finally, practical preventive measures to be taken by Serbia. In order to improve security in its area of responsibility in the future, the Ministry of Environmental Protection will especially carry out the following tasks and actions. Improve methodology and measurement equipment for continuous monitoring of pollutant gases emission from technology and energy pollutants, as well as from populated areas with concerted transport infrastructure as the main sources of pollutant gases and aerosols. Improve monitoring of geomagnetic and seismological changes and expand international and domestic cooperation. Very important. Third, improve monitoring of the states of water resources and identify parameters to prevent floods and droughts in Serbia. Next, insist on protection on territories from climate change by afforestation and biodiversity protection. Necessary. And finally, encourage other institutions and other organizations to include climate change and environmental security issues in their domestic and international activities with a view to establishing a sound and stable climate regime. That was our short view on that kind of, may I say, the most important planetary issue. Personally, I believe that it is most important because there is no activity of mankind on our planet anymore without talking and dealing with environmental protection. So, jeopardizing resources. Dealing with many problems with the drinking water, more and more. And the rest resources. Dealing with that horrible temperature rising. We are not going to do anything on our civilizations if we don't stop the changes or to do something to help to our civilization, but not to only our civilization, but to all biodiversity of our planet. The mankind is not going to be the same anymore if they're going to vanish all that beautiful species of plants, of animals, oceans. Think about this. The mankind is not going to be the same. Man as a person is a very interesting being, but without that surrounding, we are not going to be the same. We are start to be totally different. I don't know, are we going to start to be some kind of robots or something? But anyway, we are changing not only our civilization, we are changing ourselves, but not in a good way. So please, I please, to understand that we have to do many things. And that conference, I believe, is very important to understand for our society, to entire world, that issues of environmental protection and environmental protection security, and security at all, means not only the wars. We are already in a war against the nature. And who is going to win? I ask you. And the answer is yours. Thank you for giving me that beautiful chance. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Minister, for those remarks. We're very glad that the Minister has also agreed to join us in the panel as well. The way I suggest we run this panel is I'm going to ask the panelists two sets of questions. One will be around the situation and how you see the situation from your perspective. And then the second one will be about what can we do or what is happening to address the issue. And then I want to open up to the floor, and I want you to start thinking as you're listening to the panelists, what are your questions? And I will go to the young people that I can see in the room first and really encourage you to speak up, because you are the agents of change. All right, so now I'm actually going to begin with the scientist on our panel, because as Greta Thunberg says, we need to start with the science. So, Professor Đorđević, we hear about the 1.5 degrees Celsius rise, or even the 2 degrees Celsius rise. Can you explain what will happen to the planet if these milestones are reached in simple terms?
Thank you for having me on this panel. And it's interesting. We often talk about these limits, like 2 degrees, 1.5 degrees. They're part of the Paris Agreement, which is very important because as a part of the Paris Agreement, all countries decide that we need to stop the increase of global temperature on that 2 degrees. So the reason why these numbers are picked up as some kind of limit is very important to us to know what's happening if we pass these limits. And also, probably for the audience, it will be interesting to know that this limit of 2 degrees is not something which is become part of the Paris Agreement during the negotiation, but the history of that numbers goes back into to 1970s. Actually, the Nobel Prize winner in economy last year, William Nordhaus, he was the first person who set up this number as a potentially dangerous. And the reason why he set up that number, because in that moment the analysis of climate variation in the past shows us that 2 degrees is something which is really new for us as a living beings on the planet. Okay, and why is important to not go against that limit? Because we as a society was some kind of made a setup of our society during last 10,000 years on the planet when the temperature was really stable. Okay, the variation in temperatures was just only tenths of degrees. Okay, so the whole our infrastructure and the whole our functioning on this planet depends on that stable climate. Okay, because if you want to have agriculture, you expect that every year you have same amount of the rain and have same amount of the sun and things like that. So if you make unstable these conditions and go out from this range, then you potentially find yourself in other kind of climate conditions which can push a lot of pressure on things that you are doing, like agriculture, for example. Right now, we are 1 degree warmer, and we passed this limit of the past variation of the temperature. So we are right now outside of so-called Holocene thermal optimum for our society. But 2 degrees is still the limit to which we expect that we are going to be capable to adapt to that change, okay? Because the main reason, are we capable to adapt to potential climate change or not? And the Paris Agreement set up this limit, telling us, all of us, giving a message to all of us that we gonna see another degree warming in next 40, 50 years. So in the next several decades, we are not gonna see stabilization of the climate, but we will see the same change that we saw in last 100 something years. And we still think that this 2 degrees is enough to adapt to that changes. Why the situation become more complex if we pass 2 degrees? The first example can be our economy, okay? In the case that we pass 2 degrees, our economy can become very sensitive to the climate disturbances that we have, like hurricanes or droughts or extreme rainfall and so on. So what we expect in our economy, that we have constant growth, 5 to 3% every year, but in case if you have a lot of damages around because of the climate and weather extremes around the world, your economy can be in some kind of stale or even decline. Okay, so we saw that in the past, that when we have this decline in economy like a problems in 2008, that people become nervous, and that put the pressure on our society, how we're functioning. So the 2 degrees in the situation when all these damages that we see every year almost become the part of our lives, can become so strong and so frequent that our functioning as a society can be put under the questions. And not only that, there is also so-called tipping points. You probably heard all of these tipping points. So you have several different tipping points in our climate system, like ice on the North Pole or permafrost and things like that. So passing this 2 degrees, we're going to trigger more and more these tipping points. Not just one of them, but more and more. And still, because the system is so complex, we are not surely understand how these interactions of these tipping points what situation is gonna be created because interactions of these different tipping points. For example, if we lost all ice on the North Pole, the albedo or of our planet or a capability of planet to reflect the sun back to the space, we're going to lose that. So the process of warming of planet will continue even we stop to emit CO2 anymore, okay? And that can interact also with the permafrost, but because after that the permafrost is going to melting, and permafrost is going to emit a lot of methane, which is also very important greenhouse gases. Also melting of the permafrost, you have this peat on the surface which can easily be burned, and that's happened already this year in Alaska, okay? So you can have a more greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, and the whole system can goes to this spiral of uncontrolled events, okay, which can, at the end, the nature will be under great pressure, but also our society, because we are really connected to the nature, even we don't think about that too many times because we are living in these nice conditions and nice buildings and so on, but our connection with the nature is very strong. So the nature we're going to suffer very much, but also our society and structure in our society can be suffer very much. Also, this melting of ice can put big problems in terms of rising of global oceans. If we trigger the tipping point, which is connected to the southern part of our planet, the Antarctic, and the melting of so-called West Antarctic ice sheet, the sea level increase is going to be like a 5 to 6 meters in maybe 100 years from now. And in that point, you will have like a 10 millions to maybe several hundred millions of people that you need to relocate, okay? The story about climate migrations will not become something that you heard from time to time and maybe connect some events with that climate migration, but the climate migration in that moment will become everyday situation. Okay, we will be challenged to dislocate several thousand of million people, and we saw from this Syria crisis that dislocating of 5 million people is a big problem, and even coming 1.5 million people to Europe is produce a lot of problem for us, for all political scene, and you can just imagine how much problem can be bigger if you need to relocate like several 10 millions of people. So in this moment, the terms climate crisis and climate emergency is not just a title from newspapers which try to pick up your attention. It's become reality. So we really should know what to do in the future and how to tackle this problem, to solve it. Fortunately, we have this Paris Agreement. We should work to implement what Paris Agreement is, because right now that doesn't happening, but we would like to see that this Paris Agreement will be implemented in the future.
Thank you so much for explaining it in very concrete and practical terms what the impacts will be. Dr. Imiriglu, you're a health professional from the World Health Organization. What are the impacts that you're already seeing globally and in the region of climate change on health?
So we have evidence that climate change has serious impact on lives of people, their health and well-being. And I very much agree with Minister Trivan on whatever is happening in the planet in terms of clean air, clean water, food, shelter. Those are all affecting the lives of people. And the climate change has some direct effects and also some indirect effects. So, like the direct effects of climate change is the extreme weather events, the heat waves, the cold spells, and we see that the intensity and frequency of these are increasing, and they will increase. And we estimate, like I would like to give a few numbers, in the European region, more than 100,000 premature deaths are attributable to the effects of extreme weather events. Then we start to see more and more the droughts and floods, and Serbia has been experiencing that together with the Western European countries and Western Balkan countries and globally. Again, we estimate that in the area, about 8 million people are affected with the floods. And the projections are that currently 19% of the area is going to increase to 35% in terms of geographical effect by 2070. And of course, there is also the direct impact by contamination of water and the land by hazardous substances, and also which might cause direct diseases like waterborne, foodborne diarrheas and cholera, salmonella, shigella, the diseases you have been hearing, which are quite serious. Of course, the issue is also that it affects the vulnerable groups much more, the populations who are poor, and the elderly, the children, the women, and pregnant women particularly. And if you look at the indirect and long-term impact on health of climate change, some are related to food safety and security. So we estimate that the non-communicable diseases, the chronic diseases like cardiovascular diseases, diabetes, or respiratory diseases are going to also increase in relation to climate change, air pollution. And let's say because of the poor nutrition, we in certain areas will be seeing people not having good access to food, leading to malnutrition, or not good quality, again leading to obesity. And as also mentioned, one of the expectations which is going to have some health impact in the population movements, migration of groups trying to get out of the areas which are affected. And I want to also mention one important element in a huge burden in the region in terms of chronic diseases, but also with the attributable deaths, is air pollution. It's both outdoor air pollution, which we estimate about 500,000 premature deaths attributable, and about 120,000 indoor air pollution leading to premature deaths. And then we have indirect effects also on the diseases. I mentioned the contamination of water or food that we are seeing an increasing number of waterborne and foodborne diseases. But I want to also get your attention on to what we call vector-borne diseases like malaria, dengue, chikungunya, West Nile. Those were the diseases you did not hear before. And actually, it is coming back to Europe with an increased frequency and increased intensity. That's because particularly this is the re-emergence of vector-borne diseases is linked to the air temperatures, but also the breeding sites of the mosquitoes, which then expands in terms of their breeding and being able to infect people. And we started to see, as I said, an increase. We haven't seen chikungunya in the past. Now it's since 2007, we are seeing in a number of Western Balkan countries and also the Mediterranean area. We had an increase in the dengue cases last year, 25,000 cases in 2018, and also an increase in West Nile, which is also relevant for Serbia as well as the countries around here. And if you look at the 18-19 transmission period for West Nile virus infection is more than 2,000 cases, which is extremely high compared to previous years.
Thank you very much for that and for showing us the complexity of the health impacts that manifest themselves in so many different ways. Mr. Kopac, you're the director of the Energy Community Secretariat. What do you see as the main issues with regard to reducing greenhouse gases, and what is the role, in your view, in terms of energy savings and renewables?
Thanks. First, thanks for invitation. Happy to be here. Energy policy is somehow most affected with climate changes because energy produces 80% of all greenhouse gas emissions in general. Percentages in countries vary, but this is a general average. And our countries, so Energy Community is an international organization which consists of European Union as a whole, plus contracting parties, which are 6 of them on Western Balkans: Serbia, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Albania, Kosovo, North Macedonia, and Montenegro, then Ukraine, Moldova, and Georgia. And inside this group of countries, we have now 2 very different energy policies, despite they are all on the same energy market, single European energy market. We have European Union, which is very ambitious with its anti-climate changes oriented energy policy, decarbonization by 2050 and so on. And we have energy community contracting parties, which are unfortunately far behind. If we look into concrete numbers, I will now concentrate on Western Balkans, which is somehow closer to the knowledge, I would say, or attention of our audience today. Situation is also very diverse. In old days, we all thought if you have a coal, then this is a treasure. You know, nowadays coal becomes a curse of every single country. The only difference is that some of them know this, some of them don't know this yet. Kosovo has 97% of all electricity production out of coal. Bosnia and Herzegovina 72, Serbia 70, North Macedonia 60, Montenegro 50, Albania 0. They're happy because they don't have any coal. And this coal power plants which are here, they're first environmentally very dangerous and second climate dangerous. Environmentally, in that old sense, I have to tell that there are 16 of coal thermal power plants in Western Balkans, majority of them in Bosnia, Herzegovina and Serbia, and these 16 produce more particulate matters, SO2 and NOx than 250 coal power plants in the whole European Union together. And among top 10 polluters in Europe are Kostolac, Nikola Tesla 1, Nikola Tesla 2, Ugljevik, and so on. So all the names you know. Only on the place 9 and 10 are Marica, Istok in Bulgaria, and Bełchatów in Poland. So for first 8 polluters in pan-European space are from Serbia, Bosnia and Herzegovina. And these polluters, first they kill people. There are 3,900 premature deaths on this territory, around 2,000 in these Western Balkan countries and around 1,900 in neighboring EU member states, Romania, Bulgaria, Croatia, Italy, Greece. This of course costs a lot, but this also gives, so these countries didn't install filters, while EU did. The producers in EU had to install filters. In these countries they didn't install them yet. And this makes electricity out of coal very cheap because, you know, somebody else pays health and lives. This is one difference between EU and Western Balkans. And the second difference is that in EU you have a tax, or you have a price for CO2 emissions, because EU wants to decarbonize energy sector, and currently the price for 1 ton of CO2 emissions is 27-28 euros per ton. In Western Balkans, the price for a ton or 100 tons or billion tons of CO2 is 0. And this is the second reason why generation of electricity out of coal power plants is very profitable suddenly. But this is of course only on a short run, but this influences energy policy, and these countries don't change their energy policy because they don't feel a need like in EU they feel it. And this of course will make these countries somehow lost forever, because the gap between EU and Western Balkan countries is widening, unfortunately, when we talk about energy policy in climate relation. And this is very sad. I will talk later. You said a second round of questions. What can be done? I will tell later. But just another fact, if the electricity or if the production of electricity in coal power plants in Serbia, Bosnia, Kosovo and so on would have the same price as it has it in EU, so if the filters would be installed and if the CO2 emissions would be paid, then the price of electricity for households, for example in Serbia, would have to increase for much more than 50% related to now. And if you look what happened, for example, in Bulgaria a few years ago, the government increased price of electricity for households for 14%, 1/4, and the Prime Minister had to resign because there was too much of unrest and there was almost a revolution. Now imagine that in Serbia you would increase the price of electricity for households for, I don't know, 60 or 70% at this moment. I believe Minister Trivan would not be minister even for an hour anymore. This is a very huge problem, which is unfortunately not tackled with policy in Western Balkans currently yet at all. And it will, but longer we postpone tackling the problem, the worse it will be. And in the second round, I will tell what are proposals.
All right, so thank you very much, Minister Trivan. We had a description in very stark terms from Mr. Kapac about the situation in the Western Balkans from your perspective, for Serbia and for the region more broadly. How do you see the future in terms of cutting greenhouse gas emissions and adapting to climate change?
Well, I have to say that I think that generally in the region we are at the beginning of that understanding the importance of that issue. As Mr. Kopac just slightly mentioned, off record, may I say. So the truth is that we have to start to have that awareness of the importance of that issue of our lives. When we are talking about our lives, there are many beautiful data you show us here. So it is the beginning also of our cooperation, because if Serbia or, for instance, Greece or Romania is doing this properly only as a lonely country in the region, there is no effect. We have to do all of us at the same time. So I believe that the role of the EU is there to push us to cooperate in that issues and to change a little bit of these strategies of, for instance, use of different energy resources. That is for the beginning. Of course, I'm pretty sure what are the conditions in all of our surrounding countries in the region, and we are dealing with the same problems at the same time. All of us mostly are missing the money, and at the moment we are trying to establish that kind of strategies in that very important environmental view. But as you see, I'm not going to be the minister the minute as it's been said a couple of minutes ago. What it means, what is kind of society we are living in. So it is a fight all the time. Not ministers, but when we are talking about environmental protection activists, because we are indeed activists, and more likely NGOs than ministries. There is a fight in our society, in every society, to have that post, which is very important. I believe that, and I want environmental protection to be the first one, but it is not. But it takes the time, of course. I'm totally aware that it takes the time in strategies, in public opinion, very important, and of course, in the money. So, what can be done? When we are talking about energy, some of our countries are laying on that kind of very dirty resources, coal for the beginning. So, what about energy? What about energy security? It's a very important issue for every country, for my country, Bulgaria, and the others, as it's been mentioned. It means that we do need help, from EU especially, to try to find out ways not to jeopardize our security, but to help us to live much more healthier than we do. So, of course, there are possibilities. For instance, Serbia, as it's been mentioned, is laying on coal. How you say about 70% of energy we are producing from coal. And what about the rest? Couple of percents from oil, of course, and water. So coal and oil is the same. So what are we going to do? What is Serbia is going to do? To avoid coal and oil at the moment, it is not possible because there is no energy. But also we have to run to be a modern country, and it means, as my assistant reminds me a couple of days ago, that modern countries before 30 years in Europe were the countries which were spending a lot of energy. But now, modern countries are countries which are spending just a little energy. So many things are changed during that period. So we have to change also. And we have to understand that now, for instance, United States are developing new technology producing, for instance, gas from coal. It's pretty clean or cleaner technologies, and we are just watching what is happening with that kind of energy, and we are going to do it properly. So, in that cooperation, I see in the region what we are doing now. In that format, we had a conference of UNEP in December last year, I believe, and we make it real that cooperation between about 20 Southern European countries is possible, because there is a couple of huge countries and others. Huge countries are going to help us, which are not so huge and poor. What is all about? Now we are trying to try in the region to have that cooperation to shutting down individual power plants on coal and oil. It is possible. We are dealing with this in Belgrade city in 10 years and more. This is possible. It don't takes a lot of money for the beginning. But it means that in a region we have to do it together. Just because of that data, Mr. Kopac said that 16 power plants is polluting more than all of the rest power plants in Europe. It is a fact. We don't have to run away from that fact. I'm totally aware of this, and I'm fighting for this, to have that cooperation, to try to convince the European Union to give just a little money for the beginning, because of the importance of that symbolic beginning of cooperation in that field. So let us do it together. Romania, Bulgaria, Northern Macedonia, Serbia, and the others. I don't have to mention all of them. And all of us are real ready. It doesn't mean that someone is in EU and someone is not. It is a matter of region, with no borders, of course. And I see that it is possible. It is, of course, it's hard way because of money, a lot of money we have to invest to change the sources of producing energy. But it is possible across that new technologies, of course, and who knows what future is going to bring to us as new technologies in producing electricity, for instance. There is a lot of things, I think, about Nikola Tesla, possibilities, but we shall see what is going to happen in science in the world and in Serbia as well. So I'm not the pessimist now, because with help of EU, with help of United Nations, we have it now. I believe that it is beginning of our cooperation, and awareing that it is possible, that we have to shut down that capacities, but the pressure from EU is being needed. It's normal thing. It is not nothing bad for myself, because most of the countries from EU was there where we are now. We are late, all of us in this region, for EU at last 20 years. So let's make the 20 or 30 years to be our advance, not opposite of this. It is possible, but the condition is that our governments has to understand what is really is going to happen, and it's happening, and to have that cooperation in the region. Now it's possible because all of us ministries are cooperating very well. It is very good precondition, and that concrete help of United Nations and EU is being needed, and I believe, deeply believe that it is possible. It is not a fairy tale. It's very concrete. Let us, for the beginning, shut down that individual power plants, and second of all, as we did in Belgrade City, as we do in Belgrade City, and second of all, as very important thing is forestering. And I'm stopping here.
Thank you very much, Minister. Okay, I'm going to go straight back to the second questions, and then please do think about your questions because I will turn to the floor for your questions and comments after this round. The Minister talked about struggles within society to address climate change, and I wanted to go back to you, Professor, and ask you for your thoughts about whether within the scientific community there is now consensus about what needs to be done and what changes you already see happening in terms of addressing climate change, particularly, for example, amongst youth and young people.
The consensus exists for the last several decades in science community about the climate change, also here but also globally. You can read the IPCC report since 1992, and you will see in that reports that the numbers and projections are almost the same. You can read the so-called Charney ad hoc group report from 1979. You will see the numbers are almost same like today. You can read the paper from William Brocker in 1975. You will see the numbers are almost same as today. You can read the paper from Sevante Arrhenius from the end of the 19th century about potential increases CO2 and temperature increase, and you will see that the numbers and the projections are pretty same what we know today. So the science community knows for a very long time what is happening and what's going to happen in the future if we don't stop to burn coal, oil, and gas. So also the same situation about the science community here in the region. I must say that for the last several years I have many cooperations with scientists for many different fields like agriculture, forestry, water resources, on issues on climate change, and that is very encouraging because we need all of them on board to solve many different issues about the climate change, not just the aspect of temperature increase, but also the aspects of the decrease in water resources, decrease in agriculture production, and so on. In that sense, I would say that the situation is encouraging here in the region. And what is changing here in terms of that younger people and older people, I will give you my personal experience because from time to time I gave these public lectures about the climate change, telling the people and trying to help them to connect the dots about the climate change and the things that they saw in their everyday life. And what is interesting on that I realized that younger people give me a more concrete, precise, and more interesting and relevant questions in comparison to older people. Okay. For example, yesterday on Green Festival in Belgrade, it's a movie festival dedicated to films with movies with ecological teams. We had again a panel about the climate change, and one young person asked me, okay, look, I saw in the newspapers that maybe we need to move to this vegetarian dietary and to left meat aside if we want to implement the Paris Agreement. I'm afraid that is true. Is it true that we are not be capable to eat meat in the future? And it was interesting very much to me that young people really cares about how the future is going to look like. Is it true that we're not going to have a meat in the future? Of course it's not true, because the part of agriculture production, meat production is just one part of this problem. The biggest part is energy production, as you already heard. So we need to tackle this one big chunk of the problem, which is energy production and use of coal, oil and gas. And the agriculture production and meat production is just what is secondary. But the news, what news are doing, they like more to pick up this story about the meat because it's more interesting maybe to the people, and not a story about the energy conversion of the thermal power plants and things like that. So in that sense, that girl really put relevant question. On other occasion, one young man asked me about the carbon budget. Maybe some of you didn't ever heard about the carbon budget, and also asked me about very specific problem with the carbon budget in terms how the America potential withdrawal from Paris Agreement going to impact that carbon budget. Okay, but the older people are still have same questions like 10 years ago. Like, did you ever heard about Milutin Milankovic and Milankovic cycles? We heard that it's something about the sun. So I see the progress in the younger people in understanding this issue and interesting how we're going to tackle this and how we solve this. But the older people are still on the same questions and same understanding of the whole thing like 15 or 10 years ago. Okay, for me, that is very encouraging because I think that the younger people should be that kind of additional fuel in this our race for the tackling the climate change.
Thank you so much. Very good news, I think. Yeah.
Good news.
Dr. Emeriglu, you talked about the huge variety of different health impacts that we're seeing coming from climate change. How are public health systems preparing for this?
Acting on climate change has direct impact on the health and well-being of people. And if you look at the commitments, I think we have enough political commitment. The issue is now how to get them into real action with the leadership and the resources. And one thing from the health side we want, any policy in other sectors should look into its impact on people's health, because at the end of the day we do everything for the health and well-being of the people. So what we have, I want to give two examples in the European region that we work in a multi-sectorial environment. One of them is health and environment together. There is a national but also a regional action. And actually there's a process that the ministers of both health and environment get together every 5 years, review the situation, agree on the immediate actions. The last one was in Ostrava, Czechia, and then we had a declaration, which actually helps us to take actions in both sectors in terms of policies that's going to affect health. Another example I want to give is with the transport. Again, another win-win situation with the changes in the transport policies has direct impact on people's health in terms of greener environments, cleaner air, but also physical activity if you promote walking or walking. So those are the areas we work together, and as the health sector, we provide evidence in terms of the impact of different policies of other sectors on health. Of course, one important element is greening the health systems, making them environmental friendly, and so the walking the talk. This is something also we work a lot with the countries and member states, and being prepared. That's another area we support the countries, being prepared in terms of any emergencies or either natural disasters like floodings, and we have, plans and support the countries being prepared for health impact of flooding or extreme weather events like the heat health plans, or improving the detection of diseases at an early stage and to be able to treat them properly. And actually that also includes the very close collaboration with the environment sector. Unless we address the vectors and the mosquitoes who are the carriers and their breeding sites, we will not be able to achieve that. And I believe in a lot in the community engagement. So not only at the national policies and actions is going to lead us for change. So engaging the communities, and I also believe the power of the youth a lot, that they are going to initiate change at the community level, engaging the civil society, partnership with a number of UN agencies. So those are examples of some immediate actions we can take, and this could have a direct effect on the people's health. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Kopač, When the minister spoke just now, he mentioned that this region is really on the start of its journey in terms of reducing its dependency on fossil fuels. And he also said, gave the good example of how in the past an advanced economy was one that consumed a lot of energy, whereas now it's the opposite. So can you give us some examples of where change is happening the strongest, where dependency on fossil fuels is really reducing?
With the pleasure. Energy Community is, again, an organization based on the rule of law. And we have our own acquis, so legal framework, which is practically copy-pasted from EU. So legal framework of EU, which is very ambitious, and legal framework of Energy Community is practically copy-paste. And Serbia, as a member of Energy Community, is obliged to follow this legal framework. Unfortunately, this is not always the case. I will give you a few examples. European Union went very ambitiously into reducing energy consumption through Energy Performance of Buildings Directive, through Energy Efficiency Directive, through several other programs dedicated to lower the energy consumption. Serbia should transpose Energy Efficiency Directive long ago and didn't yet. We didn't start an infringement procedure yet, but perhaps it would be worth to think about it, because the Secretariat can infringe the member states if they don't transpose things on time. Then European Union went into a strong action to support renewables, but on a market-based way. Serbia, unfortunately, is supporting renewables based on a feed-in tariff, which is very expensive, unnecessarily expensive. This makes, of course, investments into renewables very expensive, unnecessarily expensive. If you would introduce auctions, we as Secretariat proposed to Serbia 2 years ago, or a year and a half already, draft law how to introduce auctions, but there was no reaction. You would have much cheaper support to renewables if you would need any support at all. North Macedonia, very recently, they changed, appropriately adapted the legislation. Albania introduced auctions, Montenegro introduced auctions. Why Serbia cannot? I don't understand. And Macedonia recently had an auction for support scheme for investments into photovoltaic, new, very huge power plant, and the support was practically zero. Auction support was practically zero. Serbia is paying feed-in tariffs for photovoltaics unnormally high. Why? I don't know. Serbia is paying a lot of subsidies for coal production. In 2017, for example, I will just give you an illustration, almost 3 euros per megawatt hour, market price of electricity is around 40, let's say. Around 3 euros of those was direct subsidy out of a state budget. This is against state aid rules, which should be respected in Serbia as well, but it was done. While support or too expensive support for renewables was almost 3 times lower. Why? If you would transfer only non-allowed support for coal into cheap supply of renewables, you would have much more investments into renewables. There are many other examples. So legal framework should be respected. Large combustion plants directive, which is yours, Minister, I mean for the Ministry of Environment, because it's environmental, it's in the Energy Community acquis, obliges all contracting parties to adopt national emission reduction plans, how to reduce SO2, NOx, and particulate matters. Serbia doesn't have this, despite the time expired already. Some other countries in the region also do not have, but some have. And this, of course, pushes then owners of thermal power plants into investments into filters. But okay, the biggest thing, this was all about small things, but the biggest thing I think is to think how to slowly, in years, of course, not very fast, transfer everything from coal into something else. And for this, Europe introduced emission trading scheme and price for CO2 emissions. And Serbia and all other energy community contracting parties, Montenegro did it slightly, a little bit, but at least they did something. Nobody else did. In Western Balkans, they shall introduce a carbon tax. It can be in the beginning very small, but then slightly bigger, closer in 10 years, 15 years, closer to price of CO2 emissions in EU. And what European Union did, CO2 emissions are taxed through this price, but this is not allowed to go into budget to spend it for whatever, but it has to go for renewables, energy efficiency, and sustainable transport. And what we propose as Secretariat for a just transition of coal regions. Because this transition always has winners and losers are coal miners and their families. And they need help, they need assistance to transform. Of course, it doesn't go very fast, but somebody has to start working on this. And this is the way forward, how I see it. It is very possible, but of course it needs a political will. And this political will is problematic because politicians are here for one mandate and all these challenges about which we are talking are for next decades. And this somehow doesn't fit together.
Thank you. Thank you for mentioning some very concrete measures, such as the filters and the carbon tax. Minister, where do you see the biggest opportunities, your strongest allies, and the opponents, by contrast, to really moving forward on combating climate change?
It's hard to say. It's been difference between different angles. So everyone in Serbia is at the same time ally, but most of the people and the institutions are against us. So it's real hard work and it's really complex. And I'm totally aware that it is in the aim of the environmental protection activity. So I'm not unhappy because of this, but I have to be aware that it is like this. So according to this thing we are talking about now, it would be very nice to have here the Minister of Energy. Why? Because we are at the same time, as I said, allies, because Mr. Andrić understands very well the environmental protection goals. On the opposite side, he understands the things I said before, not to mention again, and there is and his fight at the same time. But I don't care. I have to fight against him too. And honestly, for instance, Nikola Tesla now is investing with some Japanese companies about more than 130 million euros to have that kind of filters. It's on. It's very good. It's very expensive, as you see. So they're doing their best at the moment, but it is not enough. So that is the way. I have to fight all the time, telling it is not enough, and of course they don't like me. Why? Because of this. Because my job and my life also is not to be satisfied. Because I'm not satisfied. I want to run that way, and in the first time I said that I see the situation for dealing with coal. I see what is going to happen really. The question is when. What is that road? And of course, energy community and the EU have to push our institutions to to be very similar as the EU is because we want to be there. So if you want to be there, you have to run to these standards. That is the aim. Because of this, we in the Ministry of Environmental Protection is in some kind of fight with all of them. It is usual also in other countries, but for Serbia it is new, pretty new territory, of course, and I'm totally aware that we are some kind of unusual, and because of this there is many troubles we have in our policy, but it is not matter of politics. When you are thinking very seriously about this, it doesn't depend if I'm going to be a minister 1 year more or less. No. Anyway, I'm here temporarily. So it is very important. Because of the most important thing in Serbia is our goals. What goals we do have, and what support we do have to achieve that goals. We have very beautiful science, we have very beautiful universities, faculties, companies. We don't need money, and at the same time, we are trying to have that awareness of the importance of environmental protection. I repeat, it is not the first goal at the moment in Serbia, but it is going to be. Mm-hmm. But how? Mm-hmm. On that way, talking about this, helping us, all of you, thinking about all of EU and other institutions, and to have that cooperation, and at the same time understanding what are the conditions of Serbia, of our lives here in Serbia, with coal, with oil, and the others. So we have many strategies, and I have just to tell to Mr. Kopac that I believe that till the end of the year we are going to adopt climate change law, which means it takes a couple of years before on myself. But now we lost about 1 year trying to negotiate with Ministry of Energy because of pollution, because of gases, as you know. So we are not going to wait anymore. No. We have our agreement, we have to push them, we have to adopt more or less that kind of law is going to be adopted, and everyone and every strategy of every activity in Serbia has to be involved and respected according to that law. So because of that, there is some kind of a reaction of all of them, because they know that they have to involve in that strategy and policy. Instead, they signed in all of ministries that policy you just mentioned. So I asked them, what is the problem? You signed there your special, how can I say, agreements or something, and now when we want to and we have to adopt that law, you are telling it's hard. So of course it's hard. What is not too hard? Everything is hard. So I'm not going to stop. I'm going to push very hard. And once again, thank you for the opportunity to telling all of these things.
Thank you, Minister. We've got just under 15 minutes left, so I wanted to open the floor to questions. Oh, we've got so many questions. And I'm going to pick on the young people first, and that's quite political, because I can't see necessarily, but there's a lady at the back with a green ribbon, and sir there, and one more. You, sir, yes. So could you please pass the microphone? Yes, go ahead.
Hello, I'm Natasha Lenkova, I'm a volunteer here. So my question is for Minister Trivan. In your speech, you mentioned that water is one of essential resources. So my question actually is, what impact mini hydropower plants have on water and environment? Because all over the Serbia, especially on Stara Planina, there are protests against it.
Okay,
thank you.
And thank you very much. The next question, could you please pass the microphone?
Thank you very much. Simon Ilse from Heinrich Böll Foundation. Thank you very much, Mr. Kopac, for outlining the importance of the energy sector for overall emissions reductions. And my question goes also to Mr. Trivan regarding the climate protection law. Thank you very much for this announcement now at the end that finally a lot of our partners and the NGO scene here in Serbia have been waiting for a long time for this climate protection law, and I'm happy that it will apparently be adopted soon. My question is, will there also be a national emission reductions plan with it, and to what extent do these plans and the law have sector-specific objectives for emission reduction, which is, in my opinion, a key aspect for energy, for transport, for agriculture, for heating, and so on. Thank you.
Thank you. And now over there.
Thank you, Julian Popov, European Climate Foundation. At the moment, the European Union is discussing 55% reduction of greenhouse gas emissions by 2030, climate neutrality by 2050, and also carbon adjustment tax. All these things, they will happen, whether it will be 55 or 52.5, it doesn't matter. That's what will happen. So that would mean that all the reforms in the field of clean energy have a very strong implication on the development of the energy sector, not just in the EU, but also in all the countries that are striving to become members of the EU. So, and here the question comes to, because this is a security forum, also to the national security issues. Delaying the reforms towards these targets means higher dependency on gas import. It means bankruptcy of companies. It means barriers to integration into the European Union, and also unexpected price spikes in energy. Janusz Kopac mentioned our beloved Marica East coal power plant. One of these coal power plants loses 1 million euros a day at the moment because of not thinking in advance. So my question is, are you discussing the whole transition to clean energy in the context of energy security and national security? Because at the end of the day, the renewable energy and energy efficiency now is definitely and certainly and clearly cheaper than conventional energy, especially if we add the import dependency. Thank you.
Actually ask for another couple of questions and then hand back over to colleagues. Yes, please. And then you.
One sentence question. Please tell me in one sentence what we as citizens and consumers can do tomorrow to improve the problems that you discuss. Not in decades, not after state negotiations. What can I do tomorrow? One sentence from each of you.
Thank you. And the gentleman behind, yes.
My name is Zoran Alimpic. I have a question for Minister Trivan and for Mr. Kopac. Well, this building and actually the whole city have a city-owned central heating system which uses natural gas. And there is an ongoing project to switch to lignite coal from Kolubara mining field, actually from Nikola Tesla power plant, and this is a project that we have a loan from China. Chinese company is going to build 28 kilometers long pipeline with hot water so that the city of Belgrade can use lignite coal instead of natural gas, which has no reason in ecological sense because it means 50 or 60% more CO2 and many other polluting gases. So my question for Mr. Trivan is, why do you allowing this to happen? I didn't hear you say anything against that project. And for Mr. Kopac, what do you think about it? Would Vienna do something like that in the future? Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Now I'm going to go back to you, Professor. Please, 1 minute each, just to respond on the questions.
Okay, I will respond for this. What to do? What is your tomorrow plan about the climate change? My favorite one is to try to influence by any means politicians on any level from your country, region, or city, or maybe even smaller level, to work on this issue and to tell them that this issue is important, because they are very much part of non-solving this problem, and they should become the part of solving this problem. So as a everyday living, we are not capable to reduce so much our emissions, because, for example, in Serbia, a lot of energy comes from coal. So when I turn on my light or turn on my water, I cannot choose from which part of the energy production that will come. So I need to push the politicians to try to change this energy system for me. And I think that here right now is the pushing of the leaders to work on this issue.
Minister Trivan, I know you have another engagement, so I'll let you speak next. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So, shortly, because I have to go. First of all, Zoran, the Serbia has to make that diversification of energy korišćenje. Dakle, sad mi ne pada na pamet reč. Anyway, it's been allowed still that you have power plants on this and that, but of course, the Ministry of Environmental Protection prefer renewable resources, etc., etc., etc. So it's been like this for the moment, and what is happening is this: that we are going to have another couple megawatts of energy, but we are pushing to have that resources and energy from renewable resources, and we don't have now time to tell about this. What do I think and what do we think generally? Also, that gentleman asks, what about that strategies? You're totally right. I agree with you, and shortly we are talking about this at the moment. This is some kind of process, and as I've been told you before, it is just beginning. And all of this, your questions, that institutions is a part of taking care about this in Serbia, and to take that awareness that it is important. It's, for us in environmental protection, it's a huge struggle, because we understand what all of you are talking and asking and don't asking at the same time. But it's a fight. And we do need, as Serbia, we do need help to pass through that very hard road to have that energy efficiency, new resources, etc., etc., etc. It's a fight. And especially with Ministry of Energy, we are really talking. They are trying to understand for the beginning. It's not bad for the beginning, but we have to push all the time much stronger, of course, and to be much faster than we are. If we really want to join the EU standards, I'm talking now about standards as you are talking about. So I agree with you, and we are trying, and we are doing our best. It is not the best at all, but we are trying to do our best. Climate change, the Mr. Just mentioned, we are going to adopt this. There is also following strategy which follows that law, and we are going to make that rules. Because of that, there are many troubles we have with some entities in Serbia. So if you are be able to come to us, to our ministry, to telling many specific details, we are working on it. It's been very good, I believe, but please come to us to tell you every detail we are working on, because law is going to be to go to our assembly, but it is still some kind of discussion of that law. So please come to us, because we really want to hear any complaint or something on that law, because we are ready to adopt any good solution for Serbia. So thank you for this intention, of course. And when we are talking about, may I say, that midget power plants, little power plants, hydropower plants, startup line, etc., 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 it was fighting about more than two years, and it's been finishing. That kind of power plants, that type of power plants is very is making very big damage to our nature, and it is not going to be any more allowed in protected areas. So that is important answer I can give you, of course. The people from all around the Serbia, NGOs, scientific community, our academy, Ministry of Environmental Protection, all of us are against that mining hydropower plants in protected areas, especially that type. So that discussion is ended. So I'm very happy because of it, and in according very near future we are going to propose that kind of law to our assembly, and everything is going to be fine. Finally, thank you for that question. And that, Mr. What are we going tomorrow? Not tomorrow, today. I'm the citizen as you are, so it's very important. Not at the moment because I have an official car. My son, myself, my family are trying to spend less electricity, as we know, because we are producing electricity from coal, etc., etc., etc. So to spend much less water, etc., as you know. I know that you know, but you're totally right. Our civilization is missing the goal. And in the United Nations, a couple of little countries, small countries as we are, for instance, Costa Rica, Serbia, and the others, we are fighting all the time during these 2 years, and we are very loud. Why? Because we do think that these 40 years dealing with sustainable development, we missed the goal. Why? Because administration, bureaucracy, and the others in all these entities forget that answer on that crucial answer. Who is ruling the world? Governments. Who believes this? Who believes that? I don't. So, as the citizens, what are we buying in our markets? Just the things the real big markets and the companies are offering to us. Why I cannot buy, for instance, car on hydrogen? Why? It exists. I know, thank you for reminding me because of time. But we missed the goal targeting the governments at the world, but I believe that we have to do, and we did some kind of little job during these 2 years, targeting the owners of big international companies which are ruling the world and offering us technologies. So this is the aim of it, and this is the change is happening in United Nations, and the change you can see because of our little countries push on that totally different direction is that now we have establishing totally new ideology of environmental protection calling circular or green economy. That is the way, and it means that it is possible, but we have to think and we have to act as you mentioned. So thank you for this and giving me that chance to saying to you what are we doing as little small countries in the United Nations. Thank you very much. I apologize because I have to run on that another meeting. I really enjoy to be that part of this, and please ask again us to be a part of something of this, and see you again, I believe, very soon. Thank you so much.
I'm actually, before we close, I'm just going to ask Dr. Imiroglu and Mr. Kapac if you have that final minute comment in response to any of the questions. So please.
Just commenting on your question is raising awareness on the impact on health. So it has to be about human lives. So not the achieving the percentages, the targets, the reductions, but putting it into the human lives and concrete effect on people's lives, and demanding policies which is going to affect your life and your future. Of course, personally, you can also do more. You can use less transport, you can walk, you can cycle, you can eat less meat, and that will be a win-win situation. But I think the real critical element is demanding policies to improve health.
Thank you very much.
Everybody from us can do a lot. One is this personal consumption, so to use less, to spend less, to go to public transportation, to switch off computer and lights, and so on and so on. But most important is that we change the policy. And changing the policy is, of course, not easy. Look at Greta Thunberg. She had to start to protest, but she was nicely supported. But it's perhaps also not that hard. Serbia is a member of the energy community. It has legal obligations to respect certain directives. And if the government of Serbia, which rules the country, I deeply believe, together with the parliament, would strictly respect obligations stemming out of the Energy Community Treaty with all the directives which exist, things would be much better already now. So you, as citizens, voters, remind your authorities to respect international obligations which they signed. And this, I think, can be done by everybody. Everybody from us can do this. Thanks for being here.
So thank you everybody for participating in our panel. I hope you found it interesting and useful, and please join me in thanking our panelists for their very excellent contributions.